Thanks for listening to the Media People Podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast, or you can subscribe on your favorite podcast service like Apple Podcasts or CastBox. Views expressed by participants are personal. You can call Brooke Robinson many things: social media maven, entrepreneur, and multiple sclerosis survivor. One of the OGs of social media strategy, Brooke's career started at Sun Life Financial, where she was charged with managing their social media presence. It was an interesting time to be working in social media, as brands had only begun to take this medium seriously as a marketing channel. With no playbook available, it was up to Brooke to craft one from scratch. Her experience took her to the agency world, where she would start and head up Mindshare Canada's first ever social media department. It was there she worked on campaigns for clients such as American Express and Ford, to name a couple. It was during this time that Brooke was handed her biggest challenge yet. She was diagnosed with an accelerated form of multiple sclerosis, one that had her walking with a cane and was poised to have her wheelchair bound. A chance meeting with a stranger would set her recovery in motion. He advised Brooke about an experimental treatment in Ottawa. She qualified for the procedure, which put her MS into remission. Brooke's gone out on her own, founding BRS, where she's lending her marketing experience and wisdom to a variety of clients.
BRS is actually a company that I started. Currently, it has one employee, being me. So I'm the CEO and the founder, and it was built out of over a decade of experience in social media marketing for me, which not a lot of people can say. So I started my career at Sun Life building their social media channels and their content and their guidelines, and then moved into sort of the media paid side with Mindshare. So out of that, I got a really good understanding of what the clients are looking for in social media, native advertising and content, and sort of getting their business needs across. So I wanted to make sure that I could offer them the best approach and solutions for their business needs. So I started my own marketing and advertising company and work with a few clients across a number of different verticals.
Let's go back to the beginning. Where are you from?
Well, I'm a small city girl from Sarnia, Ontario.
A border town.
A border town, that's right. We used to spend a lot of time going across the border and making sure that we took advantage of all of the offerings in the United States.
Are you talking about outlet shopping?
Absolutely. They had a huge mall over there, and they had a Chuck E. Cheese, which we didn't have in Sarnia. And we spent a lot of time hanging out, just doing shopping and making sure that we got fries under the bridge. So anyone who goes to Sarnia, definitely get your fries under the bridge. They're better than anywhere else in Canada. Is
that the name of a restaurant, Fries Under the Bridge? Or is there literally just kind of like a chip truck and you eat them under the bridge?
No, it's literally a chip truck under the bridge. So there's actually two bridges now. But the idea is that you go down there and there's a few chip trucks, and Albert's is actually the best one. So there's a tip for you.
You spent most of your life in Sarnia, right? Like, you were born and raised and you grew up there, correct?
Absolutely. I grew up there until I was 18 and went off to university. Spent a lot of time in Sarnia just doing kind of bush parties and meeting up at Canaterra Park. And then when you get a little bit older and you move to university, you realize that Sarnia isn't really big enough and there's more opportunities outside. So I haven't gone back except to visit my family, but it is a good retirement place.
Something I find interesting about your life growing up, you were into both sport and the arts. Usually someone's into one or the other, but you found a way to fuse them both together. So tell us a bit about that. You were into hockey and drawing and painting?
So I was the third child in my family, and I was the last born and the only girl. And I had all boy cousins, so we loved to play hockey. Well, the boys loved to play hockey, and I wanted to get involved. And so I wanted to do a lot of the activities that they were doing. And so they loved putting me in the goaltending position. So if I wanted to play, they would shoot pucks at me, which was great. So I got to do that as a child, and so I loved playing sports. And then I also spent a lot of time sort of drawing and just really diving into like superheroes and creating, like, Spider-Man was my favorite.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
My comic book collection, we could do a whole podcast series on that.
Have you read the new Venom?
No, I have not read the new Venom.
It's
the one that I've got to
exciting.
get into.
And didn't Catwoman and Batman get married?
No, they broke up just before. they were supposed to get married. Spoiler alert, if anyone's listening, she realized that she would bring Batman happiness, and then that's how you would kill Batman without actually killing Bruce Wayne.
It's pretty impressive.
Very poetic.
Yeah.
Why do you cite Judge Deborah Austin as one of your biggest influences growing up?
When you look at who would be your sort of idol and your someone to look up to and sort of replicate and try to be like when you're older, I always had somebody that was around me, and Judge Austin was the first one, who was a woman that was a provincial court judge in Sarnia, and she invited me in as a co-op student in my OAC year. Yeah, that's right. I was the last of the OAC in Canada. And she really took a liking to me, I guess, and would show me sort of materials and give me opportunities and experiences that she felt like would help me make a decision on whether I wanted to become a lawyer and sort of follow that pathway. And so she's really the first and most influential person in my life, because she's a very accomplished businesswoman, and she's very good at sort of training and giving me advice, and sort of she actually changed my thought process and my understanding of what it was going to take to be a lawyer.
Working back in Sarnia, though, you had two really interesting jobs, bus girl and blackjack dealer. Tell us about both of them. Officially,
my first job was delivering papers. But when I was looking at getting a sort of regular paycheck, it was actually when I was 16. I worked at Hiawatha, which is just like Woodbine. It's a race park, and I was a bus girl, and then a server, and then a bartender. And so it seems that in Sarnia, all of my jobs kind of rotated around betting in some form. There was a lot of horse betting, and I was managing kind of the mezzanine where the guys would sign up their simulcast. And then later on, I was hired on at the Point Edward Casino as a blackjack dealer. So I was qualified to deal blackjack, 3-card, 4-card poker, Texas Hold'em, and Caribbean Stud.
Was that stressful? Because I see those, like I make it out to Casino Niagara a couple times a year, and I think that the dealers at the tables have the most stressful job in the world, apart from air traffic controllers.
It's really interesting because you only work for 40 minutes at a time. So
really?
Yeah. So your brain actually can only stay focused with minimal mistakes in your counting and observation, that you work 40 minutes and then you have 20 minutes off. So it's not as stressful perhaps as you think. They do accommodate for sort of, your math mistakes, but it's actually really exciting. And I would say my favorite was just actually getting at the $5 tables versus sort of the higher limit tables, because people take it less seriously and they enjoy the banter that comes around while you're dealing cards.
What's the training like for that? I imagine you got to spend hours learning table etiquette, shadowing people, just so you get it right the first time.
Yeah, so it's very clear. So the cameras are constantly on you, and just to serve blackjack, you have to have at least 2 weeks of training. And so you sit in a room and you deal the cards and you play with the chips, and you have to be able to shuffle the chips and make sure you don't cross your hands. There's tons of rules that are specifically for the camera so that you're not interrupting anything. If you drop a chip on the floor, which does happen, everything stops. Like the entire casino has to stop if a chip falls on the floor and security comes in, and it can be a huge delay for the people playing cards, but it's actually quite a fiasco when something as simple as a chip falling.
What brought you to Western University, and what did you study there?
So Western University, I did my undergraduate in honors history. I didn't plan to do that when I started. We now know I was thinking about being a lawyer, and I started with psychology, and so that I would understand sort of human behaviors. In first year, you take general arts, and I actually did the worst in my history course, but it was the most interesting and the most challenging for me, so I actually changed my major. Because in history, it feels like you understand how more things become, how they manifest, and how they overcome challenges in order to make things happen. And when you focus in on a specific niche or a specific specialty that you don't really get an understanding of how everything works together.
What was it about that history course? Was there, like, what part of history did it focus on that really kind of got you interested in shifting it to your major?
To be honest, it was like totalitarianism was my course. And I actually studied different regimes, but in different facets. So I actually studied urbanization of Berlin prior to World War II. And you can imagine who the character was of study. And I also looked at different political situations. So I had American politics and European politics. So really a lot about how worlds were shaped. One of the most kind of obscure was actually urbanization. So you got to learn about Macedonia and how like different people came to be and how they shaped their world and what they thought about first. And it was really kind of interesting to me where everything had beginnings. You
went backpacking through Europe and you also reapplied to Humber College to do your certificate in PR. Talk about backpacking Europe and what it did for you personally and professionally.
I went into my undergraduate at Western thinking that I was going to be a lawyer, and when I changed my major to Humber, I still wrote my LSATs and still thought about it. But kind of in fourth year, I felt like I wasn't really ready to move in to a career. And so I took the next 8 months to save up all my money from bartending at a local Irish pub and decided to pick up my stuff and go backpacking through Europe on my own for 3 months. And I started in Ireland and made my way through 29 countries in 3 months. And at one point, I jumped on a Kentucky tour and I met the bus driver and ended up dating him, who was Australian, which led into my sort of next career step. So I did a public relations program because I felt like I wanted to help with the reputation of brands and celebrities, or just sort of get in that sort of communication and making stories, let's say, go viral before we were using that term viral. And public relations was really popular at the time. A lot of people were trying to get into the field and agencies were popping up everywhere. So it seemed like a really great start.
Looking back at Humber, how different was it from, say, doing your undergraduate degree at Western?
Now that I look back on it, it actually was a perfect transition into sort of the career mode. So Humber College was for postgraduates, so you had to have your university degree. They actually taught you the skills of a PR professional in the sort of technical sense. So we would be sitting in class and we would actually have to come up with a story pitch, and we would call our professor who was up in his office and actually go through a media relations pitch. So they would teach you sort of that hands-on, so you were ready to go as soon as you stepped into your job. As part of it, there was a co-op program, so you actually had to do a 2-month unpaid internship. And it was 2008, so there wasn't a lot of agencies hiring. So I ended up heading back to Australia to stay with my boyfriend at the time's family and worked at a PR agency there that was in Western Australia that was an affiliate to Hill & Knowlton.
And then you find your way back here. And you did a bit of freelance work before you landed a gig full time. Talk about the freelance work.
The freelance work was when I got back and I was looking for a job. And my professor, who I had worked with at Humber, grading some papers and things, was actually gracious enough to set me up with a couple of his clients. And it was really great. I was doing some basic things that maybe interns weren't quite ready to finish up or needed a little help. So I was sort of like a manager of some intern work.
From there, you landed at Sun Life. What did you do there?
So when I started at Sun Life Insurance, I was actually on a 3-month contract to revamp their intranet. So I was interviewing the business group executives, so their enterprise services, and rewriting the content and what their department's services were, and sort of uploading that content into the CMS. So it was completely like digital communications, and I was doing all the back end work.
But after that 3-month contract, you were promoted to senior specialist social media. This was back at a time when social media was a buzzword, and it was kind of like the wild, wild west. What did the role entail there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the Wild West. So they basically clumped it in the corporate marketing team, and it was senior social specialist of social media and internet. So I was still doing some of the work on the internet and the back end, but now I was also making sure that our content could be published via social channels. So I was like 24 years old and setting up the standards for communicating on social across the entire company. Like they're still using my logo from today that I developed back in 2010 across their country pages. So it's crazy to think about now, but I was consistently working with company lawyers and compliance officers and pitching them ideas that was often pretty difficult in such a compliance and risk-averse industry.
Was it difficult to make insurance sexy for social media? Because that's the thing with social media. If you don't have great content, it's not a platform you should be on.
That's interesting because an insurance company isn't just insurance. They have a story that they're adding value to the consumer. So we actually created this brighterlife.ca content marketing platform that was award-winning back in 2012. And it was kind of like the first of its kind. And the idea was that this would be pre-approved content that all of their advisors could use out there that would be relevant for them to share with their audience and actually add value to their lives. So my team there would basically manage all the different business groups. So with the insurance and, you know, the unsexiness of critical illness and long-term disability. There was also sponsorship content with the CFL and Raptors later on, and there was also Brighter Life content that was, you know, a little bit lighter and more about how to keep your kids occupied for the summer break, or how to make sure that you fill out your taxes correctly. So really about managing your finances in life, but valued content.
And you discovered that contesting works very well on Facebook.
Yeah, so back then we used to, on Facebook, the idea was to collect as many fans as possible, and then all of your content would reach those fans organically. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen today, but back then it was a big deal. So in 2012, we actually were able to Lightgate. So we run a CFL sponsorship. So our logos were on the jerseys, and we got a few free jerseys. So I basically said, hey, can I have those jerseys? We'll run a Facebook contest for page likes. And all of a sudden we've got 5,000 Facebook fans, and all it cost was delivery of jerseys to the winners.
After Sun Life, you moved over to iTravel 2000. Being someone who had seen, when you were backpacking, you saw 29 countries, you said? Mm-hmm. 29 countries. This must have seemed like kind of a dream job or a natural fit.
Yeah, it was actually really exciting to step over into the travel industry. It felt like the content would be sort of much more aligned with my passions. And unfortunately, I got there and found out that all of the OTAs are actually getting the same data feed. So it really wasn't the dream job that I was hoping for. And I stuck it out for about 8 months, but then it really felt like I wasn't challenging my own skills. And so I moved over to Mindshare.
That's interesting, because usually the way the dream works is you graduate, you get into the agency world, and then you move brand or client side. You did it backwards. You got your client opportunity or your brand opportunity right out of Humber, and then you decided to pivot and go into the agency world. Was that a bit of a shock to you going that way?
It was a bit of a shock, but I was really looking for it. I think when we start in a role, we sort of set expectations, and not every corporation functions like Sun Life or iTravel 2000, but things do tend to move a little bit slower when you work with a corporation, because there's a lot more variables involved and a lot more teams and people. When you work at an agency, it's really about the best service to your client. So everybody is all hands on deck to make those deliverables happen. But you may end up working a few hours more than you'd like to, and working weekends when you don't want to. But on the other hand, you have access to so much in such little time. So your skill set can really evolve quickly with an agency versus within a company.
And you were employee number one in their paid social department?
Yeah, so there was two of us. I started, and it was just a team of two, and Facebook Zero was happening. So remember, we talked about like gating on Sun Life. Now it was very clear that your fans weren't actually seeing your content organically, or a very small percentage of them were. So when I started, that was my biggest challenge, was to have to go and convince clients not to spend money on fan acquisition now, but to actually allocate that money to amplifying their messages.
Was social primarily back then Facebook for you?
It really was. Twitter was available and we used it really for kind of real-time activations. But back in 2014, Facebook was much further ahead than the rest of the social platforms, including LinkedIn. Pinterest hadn't even considered advertising at that point, and Snapchat wasn't even a thing. So it was heavily on Facebook where the community was.
Something happened, though, in your personal life physically to you while you were at Mindshare. Tell us about your MS discovery.
For those of you who don't really know much about multiple sclerosis out there, it's very much an invisible disease. So your immune system somewhere along the lines learns that your central nervous system is a germ and it attacks it. And where it attacks it, it'll leave lesions that sort of act like electrical shorts in your brain pathways. So your brain's trying to tell you to listen or walk or see, and it's interrupted by these scarring, these lesions that sort of, cause a break in the neural pathway. And for me, all of my scarring actually was on my lower spine. So it all started out as bowel and bladder issues, and it went undiagnosed for since I was probably 26 till about the time I was 30. And so what I know now, after a lot of struggle silently while I was at Mindshare, is that 80% of people have relapse remitting. So they'll actually recover from a short bout, and then they'll go through remission. And there's drugs that will speed up relapses, and there's drugs that will prolong remission. However, for me, I ended up having a very aggressive type of MS. I was finally diagnosed in April of 2015, so about a year and a half after starting at Mindshare. And within 6 months, by October of 2015, I was walking with a cane.
You had a chance meeting, though, with an individual on the street. This is like something out of a Disney movie. Like, it sounds like a plot device. You had a chance meeting with someone who put you on the path to recovery. Tell us about that.
So by October of 2015, I was walking with a cane, which meant that my progression was very fast. And there's an EDSS scale that sort of identifies, where you are in the disease. And I was very close to living the rest of my life in a wheelchair. That following summer, so in June of 2016, I was just finishing up work at Mindshare, and I had got on the subway to the Danforth where I was meeting up with my husband later. And just outside of the restaurant, this gentleman pulls up in a little scooter, and he points at my cane and he says, "Is that permanent?" And I looked at him and I was like, "Yeah, I have MS." And turns out, so does he. And we stood there and talked for about 45 minutes. And he had learned all about this procedure that was happening in Ottawa and London, England. And it actually revamps your entire immune system and is a stem cell transplant. So he knew about it because he had tried to get into the trial, and it wasn't public knowledge at the time. So this really was kind of a miracle that we met each other on the side of the street at this point. So he immediately told me how this procedure works, and the results were basically 19 years ago, 24 patients were brought in, and of all of those patients, not one of them has any new sign of the disease. So they have no new signs of MS. And so I immediately was like, I need to get into this. So I went home, I emailed the doctor who was in charge, and within 10 minutes, he had messaged me back. And from there, it just catalyzed. So this was in the summer, so June of 2016. By August of 2016, I was meeting the doctors. By October, I was having my stem cells harvested.
Something that we don't want to underplay here is that you said that they reset or reboot your immune system. But the truth is that they actually strip you of your immune system first before they reboot it.
Yeah.
You were living like a bubble girl or a bubble woman for a bit.
Absolutely.
Like literally someone could sneeze on you while you were going through the treatment, and that could be terminal.
Yeah.
Or fatal.
So the treatment is actually very similar to what they do for leukemia patients, except they're my own stem cells. So in October, they started collecting the stem cells. So I had 1 dose of chemotherapy, which, if you will, kills off some of the older stem cells that, have been teaching all the new stem cells about MS. So they kill off a few of those, and then they pump you with Neupogen, which is a stem cell stimulant. So it creates a bunch of brand new stem cells that they extract through a centrifuge machine. So they hook you up to a centrifuge machine, blood comes out one, spits up all the baby stem cells, and then they take those away and clean them.
Kind of like a dialysis machine a little bit.
It probably is like a dialysis machine, just smaller, maybe different settings.
Okay.
And so then I ended up coming back in December for 2 weeks of treatment. So for 10 consecutive days, they would give me chemotherapy. So 4 or 5 hours every day. And I had to stay in the hospital for 4 nights. And otherwise, I was only allowed to go to my Airbnb or the hospital. So, and anywhere I went outside, I had to have a mask on. I had to keep my hands clean. That's the biggest thing out there, guys, for germs, is carry your Purell, because germs are really the killer. And if your hands aren't clean and you're touching your face, like, that's really what they scare you about when you're going through these kind of treatments. So I was locked in a very bubble-like section of the hospital with other leukemia patients. And then I was very wrapped up anytime I went outside for about 2 months.
And then when did you finally get the news that it was in remission officially?
They won't really tell you, because it is a clinical trial. They won't tell you what sort of expectations you should have. For example, a friend of mine who just underwent the procedure about a year ago is now starting to see some less pain. He had a shooting pain in his leg, but he still very much has tremors, which is very Parkinson-like. And that hasn't quelled. So you don't know how your symptoms are going to bounce back. It really depends on your body. For me, it was about 3 months, and I didn't need my cane anymore.
Do you have to go through any physical therapy after that to kind of relearn how to walk? Because you had spent so many months dealing with that. So
you lose a lot of muscle mass. So atrophy, your muscles atrophy, because you don't have that neural pathway, the brain connection. So your muscles don't know they're not functioning properly. You could probably go through some physiotherapy officially, but I actually did a lot of yoga. So I keep up with yoga, meditation. I can't necessarily go jogging like I used to, or necessarily play hockey, but for all intents and purposes, I'm healed.
And you were still, you had obviously taken time off work for this, but you were still pushing forward with your career while this was happening, correct? You were still a Mindshare employee.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in hindsight is that my health should come first. So as stressed out as I was making myself over my team and work and things like that, I should have taken a bit more time. But I was back on phone calls or emergency emails or anything that was needed within those 2 months, I would say.
Just in case someone's listening to this and they're dealing with MS right now and they're unfamiliar with the treatment you had, how do they go about finding more information or even finding out if they qualify for it?
Not a lot of people qualify. About 5% of people who have MS will qualify for this, because your MS has to be bad enough that you need this type of invasive treatment, and you also have to be healthy enough in order to get through it. So patients who have relapse remitting, who aren't really experiencing any lasting symptoms, should continue with their typical regime from their neurologist. But if you are looking for more information on this disease or really anything MS related, I'm happy to help. So you can find information on my website, so brookerobinson.ca. But also keep researching it. They're opening up offices for this type of treatment all over the world. Selma Blair, actually, an actress who came out and announced her MS extremely bravely back during the Oscars last year at the Vanity Fair after party. She came out with her cane and was in a full relapse, and you saw how devastating multiple sclerosis can be on a person during a relapse. And she hasn't really made a big announcement about it, but it's very clear. And she's actually tagged it hashtag HSCT, which stands for hematopoietic stem cell transplant. So she's clearly just gone through it as well.
Harbinger Communications. This was your first foray into influencer marketing, and it's kind of led you into where your career is now. What attracted you to it and influencer marketing in general?
I actually have like sort of original or OG, original gangster experience in influencer marketing. So I knew sort of the painstaking days of Excel sheets and calling influencers and drafting contracts and manually tracking data. So it wasn't new for me, but what this role was an opportunity to test my consulting skills. So it was a 2-month contract to come in and elevate their existing influencer marketing strategy and train the team to activate on it. So I sat down with every individual that worked there and got a sense of what was working, what wasn't, and what was missing. Deborah Adams, who is running Harbinger Communications right now, is just an incredible public relations leader, and the clients are really lucky to have her, and she's a fantastic person to look up to.
It's from there that you decided to go out on your own. And I wanted to ask you a quick question, because a lot of people want to go out on their own, but they're a little afraid to do so. Was it easier to do so after you had kicked MS in the ass? Because I got to imagine very little scared you after that.
So, yeah, I mean, I was facing the rest of my life in a wheelchair. And then, with a chance meeting of a gentleman, I ended up beating it. So now that, I'm healthy, and I sort of took a look at, what is it that I really want to do? And my time at Harbinger was a bit of a nudge from was a bit of a nudge to move into consulting on my own, because it was a consulting role. But then I actually had a lot of personal and professional friends that reached out and were sort of willing to help me and encourage me along the way. I moved into it, and I think starting on your own without any capital and walking away from a regular paycheck was probably the hardest. But I quickly realized that all of my other experiences were so transferable to running this business. So like managing my clients' budgets and their scoping, and who's going to be working on the campaign? Do I need to call freelancers? That was all something that I managed on my team at Mindshare, as well as, throughout my career and different roles.
You've got a number of different hats, though, as a consultant now. Let's start going through a couple of them. Smart Tones Media, what is it? And why should people be paying attention to it?
So Smart Tones Media is really exciting, and this is part of, what you get to do when it's your own company. You get to select your clients. So Smart Tones is a media company that was developed out of the digital media zone at Ryerson, and they've actually trademarked technology that can identify predictive moments within sporting events. So like a free kick in soccer. And then they can send you a notification to select the outcome. So if you think about it, it's kind of like having, live betting or live fantasy sports right within your chatbot or your WhatsApp or your text messaging, SMS.
This is perfect for soccer, especially if they're taking a corner kick or it's the World Cup final and they've come down to penalty shootouts.
Exactly. And this summer, we actually worked with a team of graduate business marketing students from Europe who helped us devise some planning and some strategies for activating for Euro 2020.
I think the irony behind this is that if you go to a sporting event now, you see so many people with their faces into their phones. Some of them aren't paying attention. The others are trying to get whatever moment happened 10 minutes ago on social media. And you've actually found a way through their devices to get them even more engaged into what's happening.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea behind it came from the CEO, Daryl Hemingway, who's actually an astronaut. The idea was to combat broadcast advertising and sort of logo placement. So things that, we can't actually give verified metrics on during a game for fan engagement, we can now do that with Smart Tones. So if you're engaging with the app during the game on predictive moments like free kicks in real time, then you're a really highly valuable audience to any brand, really. And brand placements can easily be put in the newsfeed naturally. So the results have been incredible. In January, we're going to be launching a loyalty program for all fan points. So we're not quite into the gambling yet, but this is going to be done through an IBM incubator program, and all the data will be stored in an IBM blockchain. So it's completely fraud-free, which is really attractive for brands as the technology is changing.
Peersway Nano Influencers. Before we go any further, I think you might need to explain to the audience what a nano influencer is, because I think they know what an influencer is, but a nano influencer.
So I think the influencer landscape is really changing, and nano influencers is kind of a new phrase that we're popping into. So everyone's aware out there. It's basically influencers with anywhere from 500 to 10,000 followers. But we've already spoken about Facebook Zero and how people are posting content, but very low percentages of your audience are seeing that content organically without paid behind it. So what Peersway has done is basically automated the entire influencer negotiation and setup process and allows you to work with these influencers for a super cost-efficient price in your marketing budget.
Another project you're working on is ALZ Live. Tell us a bit about that.
So alzlive.com is a website for Alzheimer's caregivers. And this is another chance meeting where I actually met David Kelso, who's the CEO and founder. And he used to be a huge creative executive. So they called him $1 Million Dave. And he used to do the commercials for GM. So if there was going to be a commercial and Dave was working on it, it was going to be $1 million. So what he did was put all of his creative direction into creating a platform that is the best quality content that you can imagine for Alzheimer's caregivers. And there's such a need out there for these types of resources and this content because right now there's 500,000 people out there in Canada suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia. And those people can't really express what's going on inside them. So actually near and dear to my heart with multiple sclerosis being an invisible disease, it's difficult to express their symptoms and what they're feeling and what they're going through. So it relies on the caregiver. And if each of those patients has 1.5 primary caregivers and 3 to 5 secondary caregivers, that's over 2.5 million people who are affected by Alzheimer's in their daily lives. And the 2.5 million people that need resources and need to be talked to because even if you go to the associations like the Alzheimer's Society, the content is so fragmented, it's difficult to find on the internet. So this is one of those causes that, I'm standing behind and choosing to work on, which is really exciting.
Some rapid fire questions. The campaign you're most proud of?
Global first that I did with Share Through and Amex.
What keeps you up at night?
Stock images. Seriously, they're the bane of my existence and the reason I'm into nano influencers.
But did you see that a lot in social? Like you put together a post and you use something from Getty Images, and then a month later you find out someone else is using that image somewhere else in the world for a completely different product.
Absolutely. And Facebook and Google are on it, guys. They're ranking your content for how original it is.
Favorite movie?
Face Off. Guys, it has everything.
Travolta and Cage.
And boat smashes and all kinds of great action scenes.
Yeah, somehow the face transplant means your body also changes to the person
right?
you're
Sci-fi,
exactly.
Love story. It's fantastic.
Your favorite book?
Fight Club, because it was so much better than the movie, which I didn't think was possible. But Chuck Palahniuk is a fantastic writer.
Favorite song?
Okay, I don't really have a favorite song. I always love Aerosmith, but Taylor Swift gets me every time. I dance to pretty much anything that she sings.
Best advice you've ever received?
So when I was in a bit of a rough place, my Facebook agency partner actually said to me, Brooke, go surround yourself with good people and they will lift with you. And I think that was definitely the best piece of advice because you don't need to waste time on people that are going to put you down. So find the ones that'll lift you up and work together.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would it be?
I'd say spend less time waiting for things to happen and just go make them happen. I've had those chance situations in my life, and every time I take advantage of them and do the impossible, then it seems to work out. So that would be my best advice to my younger self.
My signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
Oh, I'd absolutely own a small pop-up type store on a beach somewhere and enjoying the simple things while maybe still helping people on the projects that really matter.
No fries on the beach or under the bridge?
No. When I visit my parents, I'll make sure I get some fries under the bridge.
Brooke, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks so much for having me, Victor.
That's it for today's show. For more episodes, you can go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast or subscribe on your favorite podcast service like Apple Podcasts or CastBox. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Vic Genova.